Hello, good morning, everybody. This is Mick Holly.
And hello, Andre again.
And we have a special guest today. We're very excited to be joined by Gary Selph. So Gary is the chairman of a very, very successful business, Occupied Renovations. And as this show is flooring by the numbers, obviously we're going to be talking about his successes and his story in the flooring space. But as we were preparing for the show, and Andre and I have known Gary for many, many years, I wasn't aware of the eclectic set of interests that you had, Gary, and all of the things that you've done. So hopefully today we can share a little bit about you in the business. In fact, I've got a little picture of one of your shelves in your office here. Let me just put it up for the audience. There we go. And I see horses. I see pool tables. So tell us a little bit about your background, Gary. I'm so excited because I think you've been successful in World Championship pool. You've bred successful horses that have then found their way around the world in award-winning competitions. You've been a successful dog trainer. You were second in the state of Georgia for competitive shooting. I mean, the list goes on. You're Superman. So tell us a bit about yourself, Gary.
Well, I'm competitive by nature, if you can't tell. And I discovered early on that I was fast enough in track to be third or fourth. I didn't have enough meat on the bones to play football. Wasn't tall enough to play basketball. So I had to figure out, I needed some outlets for my competitive nature. And that's kind of how it got started. And rather than give up and say, well, I can't do this or that, I found things I could do. And it started at a very young age, actually, with pool. I started shooting pool in my teenage years and did a lot of it and became very, very, very good at it. After I got married, it kind of went away. And actually, my wife suggested about 13 or 14 years ago that I should start shooting tournament pool. And so I did, and we made it to Vegas for World Championships in 2013. Finished 17th, I think, out of 900. A little bit of bad luck. We saw the top 10 and just had some bad luck and didn't get there. Going back this year in October to shoot again. These are qualified. You have to qualify to go, and it's team tournament. It's not individual. I'm captain of the team. And so it's a group effort. The horses thing, I had a son that interest turned to things that I didn't want him interested in when he was young. And so I gambled that I could get him interested in horses. And so I did, and that started that cycle again in 1986. And we wound up 86, 87, and 88 with over 20 High Point national titles for American Quarter Horse Association. Some of those horses got sold to other people. One that you mentioned went to England, and I believe she was side saddle champion in England, but she competed in England, I think Germany, several of those areas around there, and then ultimately made her way back over to the States and became a broodmare. Grew up in the South like everybody else, so you love hunting and fishing and shooting, and I decided I didn't want to hunt anymore. But I decided I liked to shoot, so I started shooting competition handgun and got really good at it. Not long after the South Carolina state match and the Georgia state match, I had a bad car accident that destroyed my left arm pretty bad. I fully recovered now, but I went through a recovery process that prohibited me from being able to continue to shoot. So my interest turned back to the horses and back to shooting pool. And, I got into border collies and started training border collies to herd sheep. My older dog has got 8 titles. I'm trying to finish his last title and retire him. I've got a puppy that started. So, it's fun. When you have a farm and you have livestock, you have horses, you have sheep, you have all that kind of stuff, it's fun to watch the dogs work, and it's very rewarding. So I've got a lot of outside interest, but it's my competitive nature, and that falls over into business.
Right. So Gary, the members of the audience will see me pointing. I'm not being rude. We have a little bit of latency with Gary's feed, so we just like to let him know that we're going to speak. But just to share with you, I'm from the UK, and one of the most popular TV shows that I watched when we were growing up was a show called One Man and His Dog, and it was competitive sheepdog trials. And it was riveting television. It was really fun to see how they mastered that, and the bond between the owners and the dog was absolutely fantastic. So I'm fascinated to learn about that. And clearly your competitive nature exudes there, Gary. So you obviously channeled that into business. So did you start in flooring, or where did you begin?
I grew up, my family built houses, and I was working for Sherwin-Williams, trying to work my way through college, and had an epiphany one day. And I called my older brother and I said, I got a business proposition for you. You're building houses. He was probably building about 300 a year. And I had 2 school teachers that were coming into Sherwin-Williams, picking up the wallpaper that my brother was ordering and going and hanging it. Well, I knew what they were making. And I said, well, I can do this. So I said, I want to hang your wallpaper. And he said, well, have you ever done it? I said, no, but I teach it. He said, there's a difference. I said, I know. He said, well, here's the key to the house. You hang your first house. You get paid for what you do right. You replace what you mess up. He said, we'll look at it when you finish and we'll see what happens. And over Thanksgiving weekend, I hung my first house, and the rest of it was history. He and I started that little business together, and it went from me hanging the wall covering in his house to doing all the floor covering in all the houses that he was building. And then I had another brother that was in the business and a brother-in-law that was in the business, and everything grew and everything was really good until 1975, when interest rates went to 21% and the housing business crashed. And I looked at him one day and I said, how bad is it? He said, it's bad. I said, well, you don't need another mouth to worry about. So I came to Atlanta, and that's what put me in the commercial floor covering business in Atlanta. I talked my way into the largest, at that time, the largest in the city. And I think they were probably 4th or 5th largest in the country. It was a company called Bellman, and straight commission, no salary, no draw. And I showed up 2 weeks later to go to work, and he forgot he'd hired me. And the rest of it was kind of history. So, my relationship.
And Gary, tell us a little bit about Bellman. Eventually became Spectra, didn't it?
Yeah, I started there in the 70s. It was kind of a love-hate relationship, and I left in '83. Started my own company up in Marietta with another gentleman, and then ultimately sold that business back to John in '90, and stayed on for 3 years. And when I left, I got into healthcare because I had a non-compete with John. And then 2 years after I was out of that organization in final form, he sold to Shaw Industries, and it became the first Spectra office. And then I spent 7 years in healthcare, and then sold that business to a national entity, and stayed on and did acquisitions for them for a couple of years, and then wound up coming back into the commercial flooring business in '99. My wife wasn't excited about it, but I wasn't ready to retire and not do something. And it was really the only other thing I knew. And it didn't make sense to stay in healthcare because Congress had passed the Medicare Reform Act, which severely depressed home healthcare companies at that time. And then, we started as commercial carpet specialists. Patrick Reardigan, who's my partner, and I started the business together. And he had left the Spectra organization and was under a non-compete and couldn't sell. But he could project manage. So he and I came up with a strategy that, they were my customers before they were his. So I'd go pick the customers back up. He could run the projects. And it was kind of a marriage that got started. But coming out of the healthcare business, I had this thing in the back of my mind. It needed to be different. It did not need to be the traditional floor curving business. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew we needed to do something that was different, that would separate us from everybody else. I had grown up in that business dealing with owner developers and the property management people. We did business with contractors, but we did business with the contractors because our relationship was with the owner developer and they were told they had to use us. And so we built off of that. We carried that forward into this new entity, but at the same time started looking for opportunities to differentiate ourselves from everybody else. And so early on, we started focusing on lease renewals. Nobody wanted to do lease renewals. It was the work that was a nightmare for the property manager, because she'd come in on Monday morning, the phone would be ringing, carpet guys didn't show up, painters didn't show up, this didn't happen, there's no power in my systems furniture, my computers won't turn on. And it was just a nightmare, and they hated it. People would rather box, pack, and move down the street where they could get 6 months free rent rather than go through a renovation. And so we started trying to figure out how we could make that process easier. And we actually wrote a white paper many years ago. It was a struggle to begin with, because in those days when you were dealing with systems furniture, the lift had just started to come on. You had to break the systems down. You had to move them, store them somewhere. You had to bring them back in, put them back up. So technically, the business owners, employees was out of work almost a week. And so we started looking at the lift, and the numbers didn't work. The gatekeepers kept us shut out because, they all had their budgets. And, if you were 10 cents too high on a per square yard basis, they just crippled you. But, we talked at that time, I think it was Shaw Industries, into selling us a carpet tile at a crazy price that made the numbers work. And, the first question they ask is, well, how much of it are you going to sell? And my answer was, I hope none. Because if we save them enough money, they'll upgrade. And that's exactly what happened. The budget numbers worked, but when the tenant that was in the space realized that they were not going to have to pay their people to go home and sit, it was going to save them a ton of money. So the first thing they said was, well, if we spend a little bit more money, what can we get? And that's kind of how it started. And we started working that. And we coined the phrase Occupied Renovations probably in 2004. I started trying to trademark it in 2005, and it got trademarked as a service mark, because what we were doing at that time, commercial carpet specialists could offer the Occupied Renovation service. So it was a service that we would offer to you. And so we started that process in 2005. Well, and it was strange because everybody knew us as their carpet guys. But here we were doing other things. We teamed up with a local painter that we grew up working on the same projects together. So they would handle the paint, we'd handle the floor covering, but we would manage the whole process. And, we'd try to make a little something on the paint where we could by managing the process, but we made it easier for the property managers to do business with us because they didn't have to manage the process. And the truth of the matter is, when they were in the budgets or in the process managing it, they got in the way. Because if they just left us alone and let us do it, we could do it much more expediently and easier and less painful for the client. Well, as a product of that, you can imagine what came from that. People would go out and buy boxes or go to their rummage through the dumpsters to find boxes to pack their stuff. So we said, okay, well, we'll supply crates. And so we just started adding the product and services. We would find a vacuum in the process and we would fill the vacuum. And one thing led to another. And we woke up one morning and we had enough paint business on the books in our backlog numbers that I decided to buy a paint company. And so we bought a paint company, and that was in 2007. And then January 1, 2008, we kind of looked at each other, our partners, and we said, 40, 50% of our business is occupied work. We made a decision to change the name we merged the paint company, the carpet company, all the companies together, and we created this entity called Occupied Renovations. And that happened in January 1 of 2008. Well, October of 2008, we know what happened. The economy went in the tank and business dried up in a hurry. And having been through a recession in 75 and then having been through the same thing in 87, I knew very quickly that, the margins were going to deteriorate very rapidly along with the business. And when margins are deteriorating, you can't sell stuff cheap enough to make up the difference. It just doesn't exist. So we made a decision. You got one foot in one pond, you got another foot in the other pond. Where are we going to focus? And we made a decision to go whole hog, Occupied Renovations, and we just let the other work go. And we did it out as a matter of survival. And it was probably one of the smarter things that we did.
Hey, Gary, that's a fabulous story. And, I'm reminded of a quote by Charles Darwin, who said, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's the one that's most adaptable to change." And the fact that you were able to pivot a highly successful, carpet business, rename it, rebrand it, and see that opportunity and let that old business go speaks to your capacity to innovate and to grow. And so for the audience on here, if you've been in an established business for many, many years, look, it is possible to recraft, to rebrand, to focus as you're thinking about your businesses. And the second point was that, that epiphany that, you can't just compete on price. You can't just continue to be the lowest price offer. And I think what you've done more successfully than anybody else we know, Gary, you and your team, is that ability to identify value. Once your customers knew the value of that service, it went beyond the price. They could have their people sitting, being productive while their environment was being renovated. You changed the whole value proposition dynamic. So absolutely kudos to maybe it was serendipity. I think now listening to a little bit of your competitive background, I can see where that came from. So what a great story. But I don't want to stop you, because the Occupied Renovation story is now ready to accelerate to new heights.
Well, if you think about, what we talked about a minute ago, I am competitive. And it's an interesting dynamic, because people ask me all the time, or you even made the comment early on, I don't want to play pool for money with you. And the crazy thing is I don't gamble. I don't gamble doing that. I will gamble more in business than I will in my sports. I can't explain it. It's just, I don't understand it myself, but it is. So part of it was out of necessity. Part of it was having had the experience to realize, what's going to happen to the profit margins. They're going to go away. People are going to struggle for business, and the numbers just don't work. And, you can sink really fast. So, we obviously had to cut the overhead substantially to make the numbers work, but we made the numbers work. And the good thing about what we did was our margins held, and it was the mixture of the business. And if you think about, what we were talking about, filling the vacuums, one of the vacuums that came from this occupied work was we needed a credentialed designer. We solved the problem with a painter. We solved the problem with changing light bulbs out and tearing out millwork and putting millwork in and doing those things. And, all that was easy. But, the clients would look at us and say, your taste is terrible. You couldn't recommend anything to anybody. So, but you bring a designer on board, it doesn't matter what she recommends. It's, if she says you got to use it, it's gospel. So we had a designer that we worked very, very close with, Amy Antonin, and we approached Amy. And she said yes. And she's been with the company now probably 16, 17 years. And, that started, the beginning of our design services and the things that we, that we could add to what we were doing. So again, it was part of that vacuum that we, that we needed to fill. Part of it was timing, part of it was luck, part of it was vision, part of it was not having another option, or at least you didn't think you did, and being willing to take the risk. And it was not, I guess by some standards it was a small company when we changed it, but by a lot of standards it wasn't. I think the year that we made the decision that we're changing the name of the company, we were almost a $10 million a year company. So, it wasn't a very small company, but it wasn't, by some standards, what some of the guys are doing today. But, it was a major decision to do it.
So Gary, so you got to the point where you've migrated your whole value proposition to something that's very unique. I mean, we know you're a StarNet member, so obviously you've got those roots in the pure flooring environment, and I suppose flooring is still a fairly significant component of the total offer that you have. And then Gary, you started growing this whole idea, and did you find that you had a slightly different problem because you're now in a design space and you actually designing and deploying at the same time? What are some of the experiences that you went through this transition to ultimately be, this really standalone Occupied Renovations?
Andre, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind in the way that you asked the question. Number one, we were kind of put in a box. People had recognized us for who we were and what we did. And I will say that probably my oldest customer that I started doing business with in 1974 was probably the last customer that we had to come full circle and take advantage of all the products and services that we offer, which was crazy. Other people were doing it, but they couldn't, they had a stereotype. We were their carpet guys, and they couldn't, use us for anything else. They couldn't get their mind wrapped around it. That was one of the things that we had to do. The other thing is we were deemed to be competitors. The work that we went after and the work that we wanted was the renovation of occupied space, which is the management of 4 or 5 trades. It's carpet, it's ceramic, it's wall covering, it's paint, some ceiling tile work, that kind of stuff. And the contractors would do that work for good clients because they had to. They weren't doing it because they could make money. They were doing it because they had to do it because they didn't have anybody else to get the work done. And so when we started going after that work, nobody really cared early on. But when the economy went in the tank in late 2008, now the contractors wanted anything that they could get their hands on. And the work that they had not wanted, they now wanted. And we became a competitor. And so we were labeled as a competitor. Now we're doing design work for clients. And it's really, if you look at what an architectural design firm does, when they pick the finishes and they do the design work, it's not a big part of the ticket item when you're doing construction drawings. It's a very small piece of the pie. But we were now meddling in their arena. So they didn't like it. And so, those were some of the obstacles that we had to overcome. But, I think a lot of what pulled us through that may be relatable to what's happening today, and I'll explain. When business started to pick back up, the contractors got very busy doing what it was that they wanted to do, which is building space, either building buildings or building out interior space. And they got very busy. Well, some of their old clients started calling them that they had done work for years ago, and they said, "Hey, we're getting ready to remodel our space. Can you do it?" And the contractor said, "I don't have the manpower, I don't have the resources." So they would call us and say, "Hey, we got a tenant, a client that we did their space years ago. They just need paint and carpet. Would you guys handle it?" And we did. And so it kind of had a way of taking care of itself, if you will. And when I say it's relatable to almost today's times, everybody went through a tough year last year. And some people are still going through a tough year. But it created a real market for what we do, or at least I think. I mean, our backlog is the largest it's ever been in the history of our company, and we're growing by leaps and bounds. You know, during the COVID thing, like everybody else, we suffered for volume, but we held our margins and we added people. We probably hired 5 people during this time frame, and we added people, and we looked for opportunities to grow, because the whole time the backlog was growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just the jobs weren't shipping, you know, where you could get them billed, but they weren't going away. And I know a lot of companies had contracts canceled and people pulled back. I think out of the whole year last year, we might have had 1 job or 2 jobs that the client says, we're just not going to do it. Otherwise, they just got put on hold. And so, you know, you just kind of created this pent up demand. I mean, you know, if you think about it, 2008, when the economy went in the tank, it forced us to make some changes and make some moves. And in some ways, 2020 is not unlike kind of what we went through in 2008. You know, we were able to have a little bit better picture, and we had a better feeling of our numbers. I mean, you guys bring a lot of value to the table in the relationship that we have with y'all. And one of the things is, you know, you help us understand our numbers and know, you know, where we are, what we're doing, what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And there've been times that I've called Andre and, you know, you've talked me off the ledge and said, I don't think this is a good idea right now. And so, you know, that kind of thing is valuable. It's invaluable. And, you know, you asked me early on, you know, what is the secret sauce to what we do? And it made me stop and think, and I made notes and wrote things on paper. And, you know, you, over a period of years, we've had our meetings and we talk about these things that are very key, and you kind of tend to forget about them. But then you go back and you start, you know, trying to reorganize your thoughts on that. And when you ask what the secret sauce is, I mean, I think there's a number of ingredients that make up the sauce. There's just no one thing. And, you know, so when I started making notes, preparing for today, you know, what is it that helps us do what we do? And I think probably in some order, but no particular order, one is passion. We're very passionate about what we do. And that just doesn't start with me. You know, it's Patrick, my partner. It's Craig Watson, you know, our other partner in the business. And, you know, everybody's passionate about what we do. And we're driven. We're very driven. That's a good thing and it's a bad thing, because if you're driven in the right direction, it's wonderful. If you're driven in the wrong direction, it's detrimental. And that's the one thing that I think that you guys, if I had to say one thing that you've done for us, among a lot of things, it's to keep us focused and keep us driving in the right direction, not let us drive in the wrong direction. And that's an invaluable tool. And it's one you can't put a price tag on. It changes over time. You know, as you mature in the relationship, you figure out that, you know, you need that focus maybe in a little different area. You know, it's not that you don't need it anymore. It goes away. You just need to change focus and look at it differently. And to use your phrase, if you change the way you look at things, things change. And I probably use that comment every day in various different people that I talk to. There's a lot behind it.
Gary, I'm sorry, I like Mick said, we have this latency, but I mean, I just had to sort of step in there. I mean, you know, we've known you, Gary. How long have we known you for? I mean, how long have we been together? Geez,
it's 5 years.
5 must be at least. Yeah, it's got to be 5 years. I think somewhere around there, 2015, somewhere. Anyway, I forget. You know, but you know, there's also a very favorite expression that you use, and I'm sorry I've stolen it. You may not know that I've stolen, but I've stolen. You know, Mick, Gary, whenever we're sitting and we're doing a review session, Gary has this expression. He says, "What if?" You know, and he starts off with "what if." And Gary, am I right or not? That's Gary's
You're
way
right.
of. that's Gary's way of always, taking this, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And Gary was really very instrumental in always saying, so instead of everybody going off on a complete different tangent, he used to use that what if expression. So say, well, okay, let's just move back for a little bit and let's think about the what ifs. And thinking about it over the years, Gary, some of those what ifs were very, very, very powerful. I mean, has created some significant, revenue streams, has created some significant ways of thinking. And, so for any leader, really try that with your team, just call it what if. Instead of trying to, create some kind of diversion, it really is just a what if. And then sometimes those what ifs become, significant events in your organization. So thank you for that, Gary.
Well, I think where that comes from, people are reluctant to change. Anytime you start talking about change in an organization, people start clamming up. They start going inward, and very few people are optimistic about change because they're scared of the unknown. And so rather than talk about change, I talk about what if. What if we do this? What if we do that? What if we look like this in 3 years? What would that do? And it's just a little bit of a different approach to an old problem. And you're right, from that has come some very dynamic things that we've done, because when you start looking at it from a what if standpoint and people start to buy in, then it's amazing what you can get done. I'm the guy in the room that looks at things as it can be, not necessarily how it is. So I'm a little bit of the dreamer in the group. And then, you look at Patrick, he's a little more grounded. He's not quite as adventurous in some things as I am. So, it's a good combination.
Nice balance.
And then Craig is even more reserved. And Craig is even more reserved than Pat is. But it comes from just the sheer, people don't like change. I mean, there's just really, it's very rare. And I love change. I love the opportunity that comes from change, because I always want to look at what it can be, not what it is. And, going back to, what we were talking about, as far as the secret sauce, again, we're competitive. We talked about that. That comes from my competitive nature. Pat's competitive. Craig's competitive. And so, we get a lot of satisfaction in accomplishing our goals. And probably the biggest goal we have is we want to wow the customer. We always try to wow the customer. And, if you're controlling the project, if you're controlling the budgets, and you've got enough margin in it, you can do that. If you're operating off a low bid, it's hard to think about anything other than just preserving your margins. But, the one thing that we've tried to do, and it's in the office, whether it's with the office personnel, staff, employees, people we do business with, associate with, clients, manufacturers, reps, whatever, it's about what's right, not who's right. And we always try to fundamentally get to that. We want to do what's right from everybody's perspective. And sometimes that's painful.
Gary, just to reinforce that, I mean, I think that's a big one. We do what's right, not who's right. And, I mean, unfortunately, so many times we, in our business, we land up doing things because we're trying to please the who's right part. And I must say, culturally within your organization, there is no blame game. It doesn't exist. You know what I mean? We always focus on what is the right thing to do, and normally that is driven more than most by the customer. What is the right thing to do for our customer? And I must say, there is this absolute genuine, energy around that. And I really kudos to you, Pat and Craig, for creating that within the organization, because that's sometimes a little bit rare.
And Andre, I wanted to add there was a real nugget there, Gary, which was, you distinguish yourselves by really delighting your customer. You call it wowing the customer. And the point that you made is when the price is, so tight and the margins are so thin, you don't have any capacity to create that wow factor. So as you guys are looking at your portfolios, take a look at those, where you've got that ability to have more of a value proposition, a higher margin, and delight those customers. Because if you delight them and they come back, those are the higher margin customers. They're going to keep coming back. But if all you do is discount to get to the lowest price, yeah, you'll deliver work, but you'll never be outstanding. And what Gary and his team have demonstrated is if you're outstanding, you can have the biggest backlog ever, and you can control the process, and therefore you control quality and you control delight. Fantastic, Gary.
Keep going, Gary.
All right. One of the things that we try to do, in addition to doing what's right, there was a book I read a number of years ago, and it's still available, and it's called The Question Behind the Question. And anytime you're involved in a discussion or group meetings, or even just private meetings where people come to you and they ask questions, it's rare that the question that they ask is really the question they want to know the answer to. So you really got to get to the question behind the question. And if you can dig deep enough and answer the root question, then I think it gives you a leg up. It helps you because everybody has a perspective. Everybody comes to, when someone comes to you, then the question that they ask, or if there's a problem and you're getting answers to, okay, what happened? You only get what happened from their perspective. And you only get it from the perspective that they want you to know. You don't always get it. If they screwed up somewhere, they're probably not always tell you they did, but they're going to twist things a little bit to create their perspective to suit their narrative. And you just got to ask enough questions, and you get to what I call the question behind the question and get to the root of it. And if you'll do that, then you can get back to doing, truthfully, what's right, not necessarily about who's right, because everybody wants to be right, and it's got to be about what's right. The other thing that we try to do is we try to make everybody successful. We've learned, we've taken a young group of people. Anybody that follows our social media, our LinkedIn, knows that our group is young, and we've been able to accomplish and do a lot with a young group that people quite honestly ask me all the time, how do you do it? And we have found that it's easier for us because what we do is very diverse. We're not just a floor carving company. It's a small portion of what we do anymore because we do so many other things. And there's such a learning curve that in what we do, that it's hard to untrain seasoned people. It really is. And one of the major places to untrain them is the margins. We operate on a much higher margin, but because of the product and services that we bring to the table, our cost is much higher than your typical contractor is. So, we are operating off of higher margins, but the value that we bring to the table, and this is one of the things that we had to learn, and we learned it slowly. And I have to give Andre credit for it because you picked up on it early on. We used to think that, because we do the design, that's the real value that we bring. And it's a great value that we bring. But when you start bundling the product and the services and you make it so easy for the client where they don't have to deal with multiple people, they deal with one person, and you take ownership of the entire process and the project all the way through from selection to implementation and to maintenance, there's a value to that. And it's a value that we didn't recognize early on. That was probably one of the last values that came home to us. And it came home during COVID for me because people pulled inward, shut down. When they were willing to let somebody come in and work, they didn't want strangers in the building. They'd rather have somebody that they at least know who they are. Things got very, for lack of a better word, and maybe it's not the right word, but things got very personal during that time period. And I think it made it easier for people to embrace a company like us that has a good reputation, that people in town know who we are, and we can do all this stuff. And they don't have to deal with a lot of people. They don't have to let a lot of different strangers in the building. You know, you guys can handle it all. And I think that played into our hands during COVID. I think that's one of the reasons that we have, you know, the backlog that we've got now. You know, when
Gary?
you do the design, yes.
I'll just show this comment. Is Gary Superman? Yes, he is. And there was a comment from Luke. There was a comment from Luke, who knows Amy. Fantastic. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Tom.
I mean, these are potential. I mean, these are, well, I mean, you know, Luke is.
But just to come back to I've even forgot my point now. I put those comments on. What was I going to mention to you?
No, but you know, I think Gary just I mean, I'm really
so Andre, that's it. That was it. Yeah, one of the that was an interesting and there's Amy, she's on the show too. This is a fascinating thing you just said, Gary. You know, a lot of the commercial flooring companies that we deal with, felt that their relationships, atrophied during COVID. They couldn't get access to people. That relationship, started to falter. That intimacy wasn't there yet. Here are you saying that the intimacy factor for you and Occupied Renovations, went up. Again, very distinctive value proposition. And also connected with how delightful it is to work with you and your team. But very, very interesting juxtaposition from how others, felt their relationships. So I guess the message is, even in difficult times, we've got to strive to keep those relationships personal and intimate. Just because we're talking over Zoom doesn't mean we can't be personal. It still allows us to do that. But I just wanted to comment on that.
And with that, and I must say, and I think this is a great testament to Gary, Pat, and Craig, and their leadership style. Whenever you engage with Occupied Renovations, right, they are absolutely and totally involved in you. They're not busy doing something else. There's never something, that's sort of pressing. You feel that you have their full undivided attention. And that happens with people like Amy as well, and within their whole organization. And you really do have that environment of being special. And it's rare. It's rare that happens. Because people always seem to be slightly distracted with the next thing that they have to do, or the next thing on their schedule. It's never the case in Occupied Renovations. Anyway, we disrupting you terribly, Gary. So keep going.
No, that's all right. Well, I think one of the things that, when this thing materialized last year, one of the things that our group did was made a decision on where to spend their time and energy. A lot of the jobs, a lot of the activity shut down and quit. And we made a determination to focus on what I call capital dollars. If your people are not working, what better time than currently to be in there doing the work, because we're not in their way and they're not in our way. And one of the examples that I use is, we do a lot of common areas in buildings, in high-rise buildings, and we do a lot of bathroom renovations. Well, when you do the bathroom renovation, you got to shut them down. People are having to go to different floors. Well, this is a good time. It was a good time to do it. And, it was probably part of our saving grace for last year, because the projects that we did an inordinate amount of that kind of stuff. Where it didn't matter that they weren't there. It was a good time for us to be in there getting things done when they weren't there. And it also, if you think about it, it also saves the client money. Now, you had to convince them that it was the right thing to do, because if they're working, and even when we do what we do, they still got to box, they still got to pack, we still have to come in at night, they still have a certain amount of unboxing and unpacking the next morning to set back up and to go back to work. But, when you're not going to be there anyway, why not? And so some people bought into it, and it was enough work for us to maintain, what we were able to do. And, I'm not going to sit here and say it was all roses last year. I mean, the PPP money was a big help, but we used that money for what it was intended to be used for. We continued to push and to grow. Like I said, I think we hired 5, maybe 6 people last year. And we made some changes. We made some structural changes. But, it's proven to be, it was proven to be the right thing to do. And again, right now we're very busy and we've got a lot of promise, a lot of activity going on, and we're expanding. We're looking at other locations, for the things that we do. And there's just, for me, I don't see a better opportunity in our future. I mean, people have asked me all the time, I'm, pushing 69 years old, and, how long do I want to do this? I couldn't give this up right now if I wanted to, because it's the most exciting thing that I've done in the whole 50 years I've been at it. Because, what we're doing is very dynamic. It's very real. And, it's fun. I mean, it's a ton of fun. I mean, we have our moments, and people get stressed, but it's a group effort. It's a team effort, and everybody pulls together, to make things happen and to make things work. I think part of it is, when we do the design, we control how the client spends their money. We control the budget. We work with the client on their budget, and we set expectations for the client. And that's probably one of the bigger ones, because if you can manage the client's expectations, then, you're ahead of the game. And one of the problems with the traditional method, when an architectural design firm gets involved in a project, more often than not, it comes back over budget. And then they got to re-budget. And that can be problematic, because you've already shown the owner something that he's gotten excited about. Now you're going back to him and telling him he can't have it. And it just sets the tone for disappointment, right? Straight from the beginning, before the project ever really even gets started. And so if you can avoid that, it's huge. And then, adding the services that they can't get somewhere else, or can't get it easily somewhere else. I mean, there's nothing that we do that they can't go get somewhere else, but it's the ease of which they can get it with us. It's a one-stop shop. We handle everything. When people say, what do you do? Well, the name says it all. We renovate occupied office environments, whether it's offices, hospitals, clinics, medical office buildings, senior living, it doesn't matter. It's primarily an interior finish renovation company. And it's a 22-year instant success.
I was just going to say, this obviously only happened last month, but you've been going at this for a while. Gary, a couple of things about this. So you mentioned locations. Can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously you're extremely well-known and large in the Atlanta market. And tell us a little more about that location comment that you made.
Well, we learned a lot with Nashville. We've been in Nashville now for a number of years, and the premise behind going to Nashville was it's impervious to the economy. There's a couple of markets around the country that, regardless of what happens to the economy, they were impervious to it. And Nashville was one of those. So that was probably the first reason we went. It wasn't necessarily the right reason, but we didn't know that until we got into the process, because Nashville is very much a different market. But we're very successful in Nashville right now, and that business is growing. So having learned from Nashville, now we're looking at markets where we're being pulled into the markets because of clients, because of contacts, because, people want our services. We're doing a lot of work up in New England right now. I don't know, if that'll materialize into a location. Florida, we're doing a lot of work in Florida. We're definitely looking at Florida, a lot of work over in Alabama in that direction. So, we are definitely looking at opening more locations, but it's going to be driven by, the clients that are pulling us in those areas. In other words, with Nashville, we'll build it, they'll come. That didn't work as fast as we wanted it to. So we're taking a little bit of a different approach in the other markets. We're very much in an expansion mode.
So Gary, I mean, if I didn't know your business and I was listening to this, it sounds pretty easy. So obviously there must be a lot of people that are doing this.
Well, from an office standpoint, probably internally in the office is probably upwards to 40, between the various offices in the field.
Sorry, Gary, I mean competitors. There must be a lot of competitors. If it's so easy, there's got to be a lot of competitors that are doing this.
Andre, as long as I've been doing this, and you and I have had this conversation multiple times, I don't know of anybody that does what we do the way we do it, exactly how we do it. Now, there are people around the country that will, do bits and pieces of it. You'll find a floor covering company that does some drywall work, or you'll find a floor covering company that does some ceiling tile work. You'll find a floor covering company that does some paint work, but there's nobody that does everything that we do, because we take complete ownership of the entire process from start to finish, from design to implementation, all the way through to maintenance. And I don't know if there's another company that exists in the country that does exactly what we do the way we do it. I don't know who they are. Now, one of the things that we did learn in Nashville, as much as we believe that, the customer has to believe it, because everybody's been getting their work done the way they've been getting it done for as long as they've been doing it. And in most cases, they're probably happy. Then all of a sudden, we come into the picture, and I this is another phrase that I've coined. Working with us to begin with is like working with your left hand when you're right-handed. You got to do it until you get used to it. But once we do a project or two for a client, their eyes are open and they say, this is easy. It's just, why didn't we do this sooner? And that has been more the case than not. Now, you got to get to that. And some people are tough, about it. I mean, this is a business of relationships. And, a lot of people are doing business with people they've done business with for years. They hunt, they fish with them, they entertain them, they're buddies, sometimes they're related. But what we do, it's the only thing that I've ever done, as long as I've been in business, that transcends personal relationships. Because what we bring to the table is real value, and there's a real cost savings. And it can be a cost savings in hard cash, in savings on the project, or the time spent involved in trying to get it done, because time is money. And it just, if someone will slow down long enough to listen to the story and what it is that we do, we've not run across anybody yet that really, if you're in the commercial business and you have commercial properties, you need our services. Whether you're willing to do it or not remains to be seen. And there's all kinds of reasons why people don't. It can be old standing relationships, it can be family members, it can be a whole host of things.
Gary, what advice could you give, our audience about acquiring new business? A lot of people are struggling to get new business, build new relationships. Are there any techniques or ideas? I don't want you to share anything competitive, any competitive secrets, of course, but any wisdom in that area?
Well, Mick, that's a tough one, because having grown up in the business that most everybody's in, when you start thinking about trying to change or to make changes, it's not easy. It's a tough, long, drawn out process. It's not something you can do overnight, but it starts with a couple of fundamental things, and I'll go back into the phrase, what if I did this? What if I did that? How can I be different for the client? What can I do to make a difference? And a lot of times, in the certain situations, you can't. If you're dealing with a gatekeeper, sometimes it's hard. You got to get past the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper can be the architect. The gatekeeper can be the general contractor. The gatekeeper can sometimes be the property manager themselves, because of their relationships and the way they've done things, and they're perfectly happy with the way they've done things. So you just got to start thinking about how you can separate yourself from your competitor, how you can be different, and what's the value that you can bring to the table that's going to make them need you. Because it's a hard thing. I mean, I understand. It's a hard thing to say you're fortunate when the economy crashes, but it forced us to make a move, because I knew that we could not cut the company deep enough to survive in 2008. A lot of people did it, but I didn't think we could. I didn't think we could cut it deep enough to make to survive what was coming, only because I'd been through it in 87 and I'd been through it in 75. And, you got to keep pressing forward. You got to make the calls, you got to press forward. No's not in the vocabulary. You just got to stay focused, and you got to figure out how to set yourself apart from your competitor, and whatever that means in your particular market, and how you can do it. And for a lot of people, they set themselves by becoming friends and becoming buddies. And that's definitely one way to do it. But when you're getting last look on a project, you're just getting last look.
Right.
And it's a matter of, how much pain am I willing to tolerate?
Right.
And you got to get away from that. And each market's different. A lot of the guys around the country, some of the bigger guns, have done this national accounts work, and that's how they've gotten around it. So, the opportunity does exist. You just got to be creative, and sometimes you just got to be willing to take a chance.
Wow.
Thanks.
Wow.
All right, we're coming up on our hour. We just had, this has been absolutely fabulous. I know you had a long list of secret sauce ingredients, Gary. Was there anything that we haven't covered?
I think we got it pretty much. It's people. We've been fortunate to surround ourselves with some incredibly wonderful, talented people, and they're your number one asset. And we went through this COVID thing. A lot of people had layoffs. A lot of people had cutbacks. They had furloughs. We didn't do it. We didn't do it in 2008 until we had to. We as a company bled like a stuck pig for probably 3 years in 2008, 9, and 10, simply because we refused to put people on the streets. It's a tough call. I didn't cherish the thoughts of having to think about that again and look at that again. And fortunately, last year, we didn't have to do that, in part because of the PPP money that we were able to get. And we put it to use, and we did it. But people's your number one asset, and you got to make them successful. You got to figure out how to make them successful. Rather than throwing them to the wolves and let them sink or swim, you got to figure out how to make them successful, one-on-one, individually.
Right.
And
so you shared with us in the pre-show that you've been really, really successful in taking young people and grooming them, rather than taking, established people and getting them to unlearn things, right?
Yes. And it's a mentoring process. You put them with someone, you mentor them, you train them. And part of that training process is training the mentor how to use them effectively, so that it's not a drain on their time, it's an asset to them. That's also part of the training process. And we're even looking at.
Sorry, Gary. Can you hear me?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So just on that issue, there's one other ingredient that I think is for listeners and for leaders to think. You guys are process fanatics. You may deliver a very customized solution, but that customized solution is done in a very standardized and disciplined manner. And that it's just that whole belief system around the process matters has, I think, made a significant difference to your business.
Andre, I agree with you, and I think it has too. We've got a young lady in the office that has done a phenomenal job with our onboarding process. If you want to know anything about our company and how it works, you just log in and the tutorials are there. They're interactive. We have a training process in place that probably is second to none that anybody in the country has.
Yeah, that is the truth. Yes, that is the truth. Yeah, and that's the last thing, Gary. I mean, I do agree with you. I mean, I have, I've reviewed your onboarding and the way that I think that just does something for somebody. It makes somebody worthwhile relatively quickly. And, there's a lot of advantages that come from that because, the new people feel that they're worthy, right up out of the gate. And therefore their whole job experience becomes so significantly different. I think that's one of the reasons why there is this incredible passion around the way that you do and conduct work within Occupied Renovations. And hey, Gary, look, congratulations. I mean, what a fantastic business. Never seen anything like it before. Most probably won't in my lifetime at least, but great job, sir.
Thank you guys for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Hey,
thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I know the audience will be thrilled, and they should all be scribbling those ideas that you came up with. So thanks, everybody. Another great week. We'll be back next Wednesday. Thanks, Gary, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, gentlemen.